Hello YouTube, welcome back to another alternate history video. And today I got the 2000 presidential election. I got this one between George W. Bush, who was the actual Republican nominee, but against Democrat Dick Gephardt, who was from Missouri. He was a representative, as you see here, House Majority Leader at one point. So yeah, he was a representative, and he tried to run for president a couple times, as you see there, in 1988 and 2004. However, this alternate scenario is he decides to run in 2000. So instead of Gore becoming the nominee, Gephardt becomes the nominee. So like I said, he was a representative from Missouri, and he was known as more of a moderate Democrat, especially like in the 80s. I think it was more conservative on social issues, was more of an economic populist. I think it was kind of like in the mold of modern day Donald Trump, maybe, at least in the 80s. But once the 2000s came on, he actually moved further to the left on social issues, but remained an economic populist. As you see here, it says back then he was strongly anti abortion and viewed as a social conservative. However, later on, once he actually ran for president, so it was actually back in the 70s when he first entered the House where he was more socially conservative. Once he first ran for president in the 80s, you see he shifted left on that, but remained an economic populist. Well, he seemed to be more physically conservative, as you see there, because he actually voted for Reagan's tax cuts, but became a staunch opponent of it by the 2000s, opposing President Bush's tax cuts. And he was a populist, as you see there, said he supported universal health care, fair trade, and progressive taxation. So he definitely shifted his views from the 70s up until the 2000s. And it would be interesting if he had decided to run in 2000 and get the nomination, how he would have fared. I think it would have done extraordinary in the Midwest where he was from and his home state of Missouri. And his economic populism, would have definitely resonated well, I believe, in the Rust Belt. However, I think he could probably struggle more in the South because being more socially liberal by this time would come back to hurt him. I think he'd definitely do well in the Midwest and Rust Belt because of his economic populist stances. And so that's why I think this would be an interesting matchup, is why I decided to do this one today. So getting into this, of course, 2000, we were coming off Bill Clinton's second term. The economy was pretty good. Clinton still had a fairly high approval rating despite the Lewinsky scandal and his impeachment. And Al Gore, however, the vice president, was a nominee. He actually ran as his own man. He distanced himself from Clinton, which some say possibly hurt him and cost him the win, but it was narrow, of course. Bush's win only got 207 more electoral votes. Gore won the popular vote, however, ended up in Supreme Court in the end and ruled in favor of George W. Bush, who the final tally in Florida only won by 537 votes, I believe. And so definitely a messy, controversial election, and I think this would be an interesting one as well with Dick Gephardt as the nominee, who, like I said, was from Missouri. So it would make this an interesting one. But getting into it, I believe George Bush would take these states like Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah. Very socially conservative, economic too. I believe Bush would have no problem winning there. Montana would be a solid win for him, as well as the Dakotas, I believe. All of Nebraska, the second, would probably be pretty likely to safe. Gephardt would have some appeal there, being from nearby Missouri, but I don't think it'd be enough to win because Nebraska's second, especially being much more Republican back then, becoming more of a purplish blue district now in our modern day. I believe Bush would take Kansas. Gephardt would probably do pretty decent in like the Johnson County suburbs in the state, but definitely the rural areas would hand Bush a solid victory there still. Much more Republican state, and still fairly is, but it's kind of getting more competitive now in our modern day. At least in the next few cycles, it probably will get closer. And Bush would solidly win his home state of Texas, as well as Alaska. I think it would take much of the deep south here, like Alabama, especially. I think Mississippi, as well as a state like Kentucky. South Carolina would be pretty solid, as well as Louisiana. I think Arkansas was actually under 10 points in the actual timeline. And it was won by Bush, though, because Gore took a little more leftward approach on some issues and turned off some moderate voters in the state who voted for Clinton both times, but shifted more Republican around the time. But it was, I believe, only like a 5-point victory or so. I think it could still be close. Maybe it could even be a little under 5 by a few points, but I think Bush would pull it off since he was able to against Al Gore. Just because of Arkansas' shift to the right after voting for Clinton twice and Bush running on social conservatism. And like I said, Dick Gephardt was actually more socially liberal around this time. So that would come back to hurt him, I believe, in these states. Tennessee was Al Gore's home state. If Bush won it against Gore, I'm pretty sure he's going to win it against Gephardt. Like I said, the same deal with the social conservatism that Bush would run on. And Dick Gephardt not being a socially conservative like he was when he first entered the House, I think will come back to bite him. So Bush would probably take these states pretty solidly. Arkansas, like I said, could still be under 10, but I think still a Bush victory nonetheless. Same with state of Indiana. Gephardt would have some appeal, like I said, this is in the Midwest Rust Belt where he's from. But Indiana being very historically Republican, I don't believe it'll come anywhere close to flipping. Bush would get a solid victory there still due to social conservatism and fiscal conservatism. A state like Illinois, though, I believe would go for Dick Gephardt. Of course, he's from nearby Missouri, and Illinois being a blue stronghold due to Cook County. Bush would do kind of decent in Cook County, but not anywhere near winning it, and did pretty well in the rural areas. But Dick Gephardt would have some appeal in rural areas too, I think, due to his economic populism. And I believe he would take that state because of Cook County, Chicago. I think Bush would take a state like Arizona solidly, and definitely a solid Republican around the time. It's kind of more of a swing state, purple state now. But a solid Bush win here in this year of 2000. The state of Virginia, I think, are good for Bush. He won in a pretty likely margin against Al Gore. It was a little under 10, but a solid victory there because of the Nova suburbs being much more Republican around this time, and the rural areas turning out for Bush. Gore did decent in some of the rural areas, but Virginia's rural areas were definitely becoming more Republican, while the suburbs were starting to shift more blue, but still pretty Republican at this time, and Bush was able to win it solidly, so I think it would against Dick Gephardt here too. But Dick Gephardt's stronger states will be here in the Northeast, like New York. Vermont will be pretty likely. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. I think Bush would be competitive, somewhat competitive in some of his northeastern states, like Connecticut, because that's actually where he was born. His father had roots there in the Northeast, being from Massachusetts originally. So Bush would get kind of decent margins, better than Republicans today would, but still solid victories for Gephardt, I believe, being the blue strongholds they have been for several years now. Delaware, Maryland, due to Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., of course. Maine's first district, I think, would be solid. Maine at large, too. I don't think that was really competitive back then. And also Maine's second, too. All of Maine. Solid wins there for Gephardt since they did go for Gore. So now some more competitive states. Colorado, I think, would be solid for Bush. It'd be under 10, but it was a much more Republican state around the time, leaning not as much population growth like it is now in the Denver suburbs, and Bush was a pretty good fit for that area. And also the rural areas, as I say, I believe would turn out for him. Getting a pretty solid victory there. New Mexico was I think it was actually the closest state, even closer than Florida. Only decided by 300 votes, I believe. So I'll come back to that one. But the West Coast here, California, would be pretty solid for Gephardt. Bush was actually pretty competitive in these West Coast states, especially Oregon. That was actually a close state, too. I think it was the closest state on the West Coast. Gore narrowly pulled it off, though, due to the Oregon suburbs in the state, Portland. So for that reason, I think Gephardt will win it, too. Definitely Washington would be pretty likely. But Oregon, I believe, would still be close like it was, but I believe Gephardt would pull it off since Gore was able to. Like I said, due to Portland, the suburbs there, but Bush would definitely make the state close still like it did in our timeline, but still a Gephardt win, I believe. And the state of Hawaii down here will go for Gephardt, definitely. State of Minnesota, I think, would be pretty solid for him. Definitely his economic populism would really win him over a lot of voters in these Rust Belt states and farm states. It definitely run hard on those economic populist stances. That would definitely help him, I believe, with laborers and farmers in the state. Same deal with Iowa, even. I think it'd be pretty close because it was close in our timeline, but Gore was able to win it, so I think Gephardt would do the same, especially being from neighboring Missouri would help him definitely do go with farmers and working class in the state. Definitely more rural state, still is, but it was definitely more of a swing state, even more lean blue around the time. So I think Gephardt would take it due to, like I said, his economic populism that he would double down on. It'd be like a Democrat version of Trump with his economic populism that he'd run on. And I think it would actually pull out Wisconsin and Michigan. Gore won them. Michigan he won more solid. Wisconsin was a little closer, but Gore still won it. So I think Gephardt would do the same. Bush wasn't seen as really as an economic populist. He was more of a physical conservative, like traditional Republican. So for that reason, I believe Gephardt would win them. Like I said, just a message of economic populism would be enough to win all these states. He would definitely do extraordinarily well, and a lot of these even do better than Gore, I believe, in states like Iowa and Wisconsin, being from Missouri. Uh, a state like Georgia down here, I believe it go for Bush solidly. It was a little over 10 against Gore, so probably about the same here against Gephardt. Bush doing really well in the Atlanta suburbs, which were a little more Republican around the time. States like counties, like Cobb County and places like that, and of course the rural areas turned out for Bush. We got him a solid victory there. Same in North Carolina, another solid one for GW. State of Nevada would be an interesting one. I think it was close both times in both elections. It may have been a little closer in 04, but here in 2000, Bush did really well in the rural areas. He also won Washoe County, Gore won Clark County. And it was pretty kind of close there, but it seemed to be more lean Republican back then. So I think for that reason that Bush will still pull it out by a couple points. So the rest of the states over here, I think a state like Pennsylvania would go for Dick Gephardt. Like I said, again, economic populism, I believe will win him the state. He'd do really well in the suburbs, I believe. Even do pretty good in some of the rural areas like the Tea Part, and do pretty good in Western PA, which was more Democratic back then. Bush will still do pretty good in the Tea Part, but I don't think he'd do good enough in the suburbs. And like I said, Western PA, which was a little more Democratic back then, I believe would hand Gephardt the victory due to economic populism. And it'd be the same deal in Ohio, I believe, which would make it close. Bush did pull it off due to doing better in the rural areas of the state. Gore still did better in the more Democratic parts like the northeastern part and northern Ohio. It was only about 3 points, though. But if Dick Gephardt's really running hard on economic populism, I think he could actually pull it off. It'd probably be narrow, considering it was pretty close in the actual election. Like I said, 3 points, but since I believe Gephardt would be doubling down more on economic populism than someone like Gore, who would just be your traditional establishment Democrat, I think that would hand him the state. He'd do a lot better, I believe, in the northeastern part and do kind of good in some of the rural areas. Bush would still do better there, though, I believe. But I think him just doubling down, doing really good on economic populism, would give him the state, as these other ones, too. And that does put him over the top. He actually wins here. But for these remaining ones, New Mexico, like I said, was a Gore state, closest state in the election. So if Gore was able to win it, then Gephardt probably would too. Still be a close one because Bush and him would both do pretty good with Hispanics, especially 2004 when Bush did better with Hispanics and was able to win the state. But this being 2000, Gephardt, I believe, would pull it off since Gore was able to. And this just leaves at least 4 more states now. The state of West Virginia went for Bush. Gore actually doubled down a lot on environmentalism, which pretty much cost him the state. It wasn't like a huge victory, but it was pretty solid for Bush. The state definitely made a shift towards republicanism around this time. So yeah, like I said, Gore doubled down on environmentalism, so pretty much cost him the state. And I believe Clinton put in some economic policies as president too, which had a hand in Bush winning it. So I think it would be pretty close. Gephardt could make it a little more competitive, but since it was starting to shift more Republican around the time, I think Bush could still pull it off narrowly, probably about 2 to 3 points. It could, in the end, flip to Gephardt, but I think if it was shifting more Republican around the time, trending that it would probably still go to Bush by a couple points. Because, like I said, I believe Clinton actually did implement some economic policies. President that West Virginia didn't like the coal mining industry, big industry in the state. So I think Bush could pull it off by a couple points, like I said. And we got 3 remaining states: Missouri, Florida, New Hampshire. The state of Missouri, Gephardt's home state, was decided by only a few points. Bush won it due to his rural margins. Gore did pretty decent in some of the rural areas too, and did good in St. Louis. I believe Gephardt would also do great in St. Louis. I believe he'd improve in some of the rural areas due to it being his home state, and I think he'd pull it off by a close margin, maybe about 1 to 2 points. I just think him from being there would definitely help, and like I said, right on economic populism would go really well. Missouri would be more of an economically populous state, so I think Dick Gephardt would win it, being his home state, by a couple points maybe. So I don't think that would be too much controversial of a call, considering how close it was. But for these remaining states, New Hampshire and Florida, the state of New Hampshire went for Bush narrowly. Ralph Nader took away a significant amount of the vote. Some people say he cost Gore the state, but I don't know if that was entirely true. But I think Gephardt would be a little better fit than Gore for the state. So for that reason, I think Gore would actually, or excuse me, Gephardt would narrowly pull off New Hampshire. Like I said, I could go for Bush in the end since they won it, but then again, I think Gephardt would be a little better than Gore, especially on issues like economic populism. And like I said, Gephardt was a little more socially liberal around this time, which would help him. Bush is still be competitive in it. Maybe Bush could still pull it off narrowly. I think it would be a true toss-up, honestly. But if Gephardt's win all these other states like Missouri, Ohio, he probably would pull off New Hampshire too. I think he'd do better with educated voters. He supported things like universal health care, I think. And I think he'd do a lot better with a lot of younger voters who would really get enthusiasm turned out, which does make it a good part of the state, being because of college towns in New Hampshire. I think they really turned out for Gephardt. He'd do a lot better with younger voters, I think, which are handling the state in a narrow margin still. But like I said, I think that's a true toss-up there. But moving on to the last state of Florida, won by Bush very narrowly, only 500 votes. Maybe Bush could still pull it off due to after being 2 terms of Bill Clinton. And like I said, Gephardt was a little more socially liberal on the time. But I don't know. I think this one's another toss-up like New Hampshire. Like I said, you can make the case that Gephardt being a little more socially liberal might hurt him, and Bush could still pull it out narrowly, or maybe Gephardt being a little more better of a candidate than Gore, like when it comes to charisma or policy positions, could pull it off, and being from Missouri might help him some, even though that's a Midwestern state. So, but I think due to it being a southern state and Bush being from Texas, that he could still pull it off. It would still be close, but I think because after 2 terms of Clinton, that some swing voters would be, of course, a little tired of electing a Democrat, so that could help Bush, like I said, and Gephardt was a little more socially liberal around the time, so I don't know if that would really help him, because Gore tried to present himself as a moderate, which made the state really close, and being from the South, Tennessee, made it competitive. But since Gephardt is a Midwestern candidate, I could see Bush pulling out Florida due to social conservatism, and after 2 terms of Clinton, I think they want somebody fresh, new. But it's not enough, as Gephardt still wins due to doing better in the Rust Belt. So yeah, the Rust Belt states elect him. He also wins New Hampshire, according to this prediction. But all the other states still go for Bush that he won in our timeline. But just comment below what you think of this, if you agree or not, if Gephardt would win the states that I gave him, and or if Bush could still pull out a victory if you disagree. But definitely an interesting one I thought about doing for a while, and I finally got around to doing it. So yeah, just like I said, comment below what you think of this. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. And the electoral tally is Dick Gephardt 302, Bush 235. So yeah, thank you for watching. Subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time.